Trade war whiplash. Here's how the day started, with Ontario Premier Doug Ford digging in on electricity export taxes and angering Trump's White House.
You need our electricity. You need the 4.3 million barrels of oil that gets shipped down. I want to make sure we build an AMCAN fortress, the two greatest countries in the world. Fighting like this does not make sense. But I will respond appropriately on the electricity.
The president saw the Premier, Doug Ford, make an egregious and insulting comment threatening to shut down electricity for the American people, for hardworking American families. He made that threat. The president saw that and has an obligation and a responsibility to respond accordingly.
The White House's press secretary went on to say the White House was especially concerned by Ford's threat to go further and cut off power exports to the three states currently connected to Ontario's grid: Michigan, Minnesota, and New York. Donald Trump sounding off on social media, announcing he would double steel and aluminum tariffs set to take effect at midnight from 25% to 50%, and concluding with, can you imagine Canada stooping so low as to use electricity? That so affects the life of innocent people as a bargaining chip and threat. They will pay a financial price for this so big that it will be read about in history books for many years to come. Now, that was this morning. Then late this afternoon, after a call with Trump's Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick, Ford halted his export tax. Listen.
Secretary Lutnick has sent out an olive branch to us to come down and immediately meet with him, meet with the whole trade administration, and discuss the future. Rather than waiting till April the 2nd, threats going back and forth, tit for tat, I've agreed to suspend temporarily, and we always have that tool in our toolkit. By no means are we just going to roll over, because we don't roll over to anyone. What we are going to do is have a constructive conversation moving forward.
So after those comments from Premier Doug Ford, we swing over to the White House, where alongside Elon Musk, Donald Trump ends up talking to reporters. Here's what he has to say about how things are unfolding.
Already Canada, and I respect very much. As you know, there's a very strong man in Canada who said he wasn't going to charge a surcharge or a tariff on electricity coming into our country. He has called and he said he's not going to do that. Okay, he's not going to do that. And it would have been a very bad thing if he did, and he's not going to do that, so I respect that.
All right, so let's try and figure out where things stand at this very moment. David Paterson is Ontario's representative in Washington, and he is with us live right now. Mr. Paterson, it's good to see you. Thank you so much for making the time.
Hi, Vashi.
So the big question heading into just this program a few minutes ago, we were wondering from the White House whether or not there would be officially a comment or a decision on doubling the aluminum and steel tariffs, and it just landed in our inbox from a spokesperson. And I'm going to read a little bit of it and get your reaction. After President Trump threatened to use his executive powers to retaliate with a colossal 50% tariff against Canada, Ontario Premier Doug Ford spoke with Secretary Lutnick to convey that he is backing down on implementing a 25% charge on electricity exports. President Trump has once again used the leverage of the American economy, which is the best and biggest in the world, to deliver a win for the American people. Pursuant to his previous executive orders, a 25% tariff on steel and aluminum with no exceptions or exemptions will go into effect for Canada and all of our other trading partners at midnight, March 12th. So the 50% threat appears to have now been receded. Is that how you view it, or what you've heard?
Yeah, that's correct. So instead of 50%, it'll be a 25% tariff as originally planned on steel and aluminum, which is not anything we want to see continue. But an olive branch was extended, as the Premier said, and the Premier, I think, made the right call to accept that. We'll go to Washington together on Thursday and meet with Secretary Lutnick and USTR Jameson Greer, and talk about how to get past tariffs and move towards a renewal of the USMCA agreement instead. And so Ontario, in turn, is suspending the 25% additional cost that's been put in place on exports of Ontario electricity. And I think that was the very appropriate thing to do. It was a tough thing to do. It certainly got attention. The parties have been in fairly regular touch back and forth between the Premier and Secretary Lutnick, and we look forward to sitting down directly on Thursday in Washington.
So help me understand, Mr. Paterson, why it's appropriate. Because yesterday, throughout many interviews with U.S. media, the Premier was adamant that until the entire tariff threat is removed, the export tax will stay on electricity. Today, all that changed was that in the morning, President Trump threatened to do something worse than he's already doing at midnight. And in the afternoon, he said, I won't do the worst thing, but I'll still do the bad thing. Why does that, like, what did we get out of backing down?
I think the most important thing is to get on to a trajectory of talking about stopping an acceleration of tariff applications and getting into a discussion of what happens after all these tariffs. How are we going to get rid of them? And we've been saying in Ontario for the last year, certainly I have as well day to day in Washington on Capitol Hill, is that, look, we want to grow the economy together. This sort of tariff approach makes no sense. Can we back out of that together in a noble kind of way? There are lots more things that you need from Canada than perhaps you'll even acknowledge. And we want to work on those together to grow the economy. And so we saw some important changes as well from the auto sector, talking with the president last week, talking about maybe we're targeting the wrong people here. Maybe the people that comply with the USMCA here within North America are the ones that we should be supporting, and those that are free riding on it are the ones that we should be looking at. So it's the start of a discussion. And of course, our federal government is the one that needs to lead trade discussions and the like. But I think there is a bit of mutual respect here with Premier Ford and Secretary Lutnick, and it's worth sitting down always to talk about how you can stop hitting each other and start trying to build an economy together.
Do you have any of those specific, or does Ontario, I should say more largely, the province, have any specific assurances from someone like Howard Lutnick or anyone involved in the administration that stopping the acceleration, as you termed it, is something that they are actually interested in doing? Because so far, nothing on the public record would indicate that's the case.
Yeah, and I think that anybody who is doing any kind of negotiations or the like realizes that you have to be able to give and take and go forward and have a conversation and see if you can get onto a discussion where you're in the same tent trying to mutually grow things together. That's how, whether it's in labor negotiations or other things, that's the way that these things go. If you take an unwieldy position where you're never going to change, I can guarantee you where that's going to lead to. And it's not a pretty outcome when you do 80% of your trade with the United States. So of course, the smart thing to do is to sort of build towards something positive. The Premier's referred to that as an AMCAM fortress and an ability to support each other and grow each other without the application of tariffs, which can be devastating to both sides. And I think both sides are starting to see that. The stock market is starting to point that out in no uncertain terms to the American president. I think Congress is starting to understand that tariffs are not really very popular in their districts. And certainly business is starting to speak out and say, this is the last thing we need when we're trying to grow and we're trying to bring down costs, not bring them up. So all of those things lead you to a discussion of solving problems rather than just sitting in our corners and looking at each other.
And I do take that point, certainly, and I think the economic argument you lay out is one that Canadians, by and large, of course, would agree with. We're all sort of feeling like this doesn't make sense, particularly when the economic argument is laid out. But my question, with great respect, Mr. Paterson, was whether or not, there have been any specific indications that when you do engage in these negotiations, you are doing so with a partner who is also doing so in good faith. Because, again, we've been presented with so much evidence in the past 6 weeks that that partner is not the United States. And even yesterday, the way in which Premier Ford was talking about the imposition of this electricity export tax was very firm, very specific. It's not going away until all the tariffs do. And tonight, it was a very different, or today, rather, it was very different.
Yeah, I think, as the Premier said, if you are in a standoff and someone extends an olive branch and it gives you the chance to be able to reduce pain with respect to the cost of electricity and to reduce pain with respect to the cost on aluminum at the same time, and then probably the most important outcome is to sit down and talk about how we both get each other out of this pickle, then of course you want to do that. So this is very good news to be able to take this step forward. If you sat around and waited, Vashi, with all respect, for guarantees, you'd be sitting for a long time. And so it's time for us to sit down and talk about our mutual interest and being able to take on the real challenges that we both face, and be those China or be those the need to use our electricity to grow the economy, to power artificial intelligence. And I think what we're finding is that as we've gotten into this, there's been a growing respect of the need that Americans have for what we provide to them in terms of all our natural resources, our critical minerals, and frankly, electricity is just the tip of the spear when it comes to the things that the American economy cannot live without. And so this is a very good thing to be able to suspend this, and we can always put it back on, as the Premier has said, but wouldn't you go and sit down and have a discussion and see if you can move things forward so that our federal government, when it lands its feet, has the basis to start having a good discussion. I spoke with some counterparts of the federal government just a few minutes ago, and I think we're all encouraged that this is a positive step forward. If it's not, we can always resubmit the 25%. That's not a problem. But why would you ever miss this opportunity? So I'll be in Washington again on Thursday.
And I just have a final question about that. I would just really quickly point out, it's not as though Donald Trump is not imposing any tariffs tonight. He is imposing an additional 25% on steel and aluminum as of midnight. He's just not doing it to 50%. I did want to ask you about the meeting itself. And I saw in Howard Lutnick's statement in particular that there was some sort of opening around the USMCA. And I wondered if you could inform Canadians tonight and Ontarians who are curious, is that the purpose of the meet? Is there an explicit sort of agreement or even a tacit one around talking about reopening USMCA in the immediacy? And is that really Premier Ford's jurisdiction? Ultimately, I guess it would fall to the federal government, which, goodness, it could be this prime minister, the outgoing one, the incoming one, the one in 6 weeks. Who is leading those discussions?
Well, Premier Ford just received a very strong mandate, and he's been very clear in terms of the leadership that the premiers can provide as well. We may have some uncertainty ahead in terms of figuring out some of the federal issues, but we don't want to ever stop being able to try and solve this particular problem. And if you were to draw an analogy and say that tariffs are like an artillery fire before a battle, then the USMCA could be the peace agreement. And the USMCA is something that could be improved. We know there are a lot of problems that have grown up with respect to the USMCA that could be strengthened and made better, and actually, at the end of the day, could be even better for our Canadian economy than going into this entire thing. So if there's a pathway to remove the artillery fire of tariffs and stop that, and get into an agreement that actually helps us grow the economy together, that seems like a pretty logical and important thing to do. And we'll hope to make some yards in that respect on Thursday. There's no guarantees. It's a start, but it starts with mutual respect. We saw some of that reflected back on the Premier from both the President and Howard Lutnick today, and we'll build on that.
Okay, I'll leave it on that note. Mr. Paterson, thanks so much for making the time. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Vashi.